Hi, my name is Hart Steen. I'm an independent researcher and the creator of the Divine Remembering. In this video and the subsequent videos that follow within this series, I'm going to begin to unpack and lay the foundational framework for something called the high science. This is something that's been whispered about in esoteric traditions and ancient wisdom, and explored through various philosophies and traditions, but never actually threaded together fully in a modern way of understanding. And the last decade of my research provides that understanding. So, what is a high science? To understand that, we want to look at science and what it does. First of all, science helps create models. Models that explain things, helps us understand our reality and create intelligence. So it would have to create a model that explains things that's predictable and that can also begin to connect and create coherence or correspondence with other things. Because right now we have science that is very disparate and disconnected because it's based upon the physical world and observable material. That worked for a while in our history. Things like Newtonian physics and explaining why cause and effect happen in the physical world, that was what we thought really existed and how to explain reality until quantum physics came around. When quantum physics came around, we realized, oh my gosh, that's not exactly how the universe works at a really small level. And so at a really large level, at a very high level, we can understand that maybe reality doesn't function the way that we think it does based upon our understanding of the physical reality and even the quantum. Maybe there's more to the story. And that's what this explains. The high science has been said to be something that could be shown by the mantra or the idea of as above, so below. And it should explain all of human existence. And so really we need to look at existence and what it actually is, what it is to be a human. When we understand that there's more to the human than just the biology, when we understand that there's more to the human than just the mind, that those are malleable, and that the spiritual aspect of ourselves is what gives us connection to other things, then we can begin to understand that those are all planes of understanding, channels of information. Those are aspects of existence. Where we actually understand humanity is not in the physical world. We understand humanity through the conscious world, the consciousness plane, the field of consciousness. Now, this is something that in modern science we have yet to explain and we argue about. There's something called the hard problem of consciousness. How does consciousness emerge through biology? And that's what these videos will cover because we have to take a step-by-step approach to understand this. But we want to take a large macro view and then begin to dial in. We've been looking at the biology for a very long time. We've been looking at the physical observable world for the last few hundred years since the scientific revolution and before that. So what we're going to do now is take this concept of as above, so below, and apply it to consciousness and see, is there something that we could observe there, something that we could begin to build? In fact, there is. In every major tradition, there is something called a cycle of consciousness. In India, it's the Yuga cycle. In other traditions in Mesoamerica, it was the development of humanity, where we would go into darkness and light. In Greek and Roman traditions, it was certain ages. And it usually revolves around the Milky Way galaxy. Within the Yuga cycle, we can understand it through the zodiac. And so we'll unpack that as we go. This idea of the cycle of consciousness is something we really need to pay attention to, that there actually is a cycle that humanity goes through of where our consciousness evolves. It comes online, it goes dark, it is disconnected, and then it ascends. Again, it descends and ascends. I have this in my other videos, but that's where we start. So if we look at this high science, this is what the map would be. We would see at the top, we would start with the cycle of consciousness because human consciousness is what affects everything down below it. So anything that we would ever talk about lives in the world of human consciousness. Our sciences, our math, our arts, our experiences, our feelings, all of that is involved with the ability for humans to interact on a highly conscious level. And so understanding that there's a cycle to this level is pivotal. And then from that, we begin to go down. And what maps that cycle of consciousness, because it's invisible to us, it's something that we experience, are the stars. Because this is a very long cycle when we understand it. In the traditions that we can find it in, they map it through the solstices and the equinoxes and how they are involved with the zodiac. So the stars actually become a roadmap for human existence and human conscious flow. And it follows a pattern. It's the pattern of precession. Then from the stars, how we would keep track of those stars is the ancient sites that we have. And we have many of these sites. My research reveals that the patterns I'm going to show you can be found over the last 13,000 years from our earliest archaeoastronomical sites like Göbekli Tepe, all the way through the Americas, Chaco Canyon, Angkor Wat, to South America and the Paracas Candelabra and beyond. All of these are connected to certain aspects of the Milky Way and the ecliptic, which is the zodiac, the path that the sun takes through the sky. Why we need to map this is because that is the only way to know where we are in this large cycle. And how we can know this is when we look at the sites, we begin to understand that not only are they connected to the solstices and the equinoxes, which are terrestrial aspects, they are also connected to ecliptic changes and then galactic changes. And I'll show you that when we talk about Göbekli Tepe and how it's seen. You can see this at other sites. When we have certain alignments at certain times, it is very clear that it builds a perfect model of the galactic plane. And when we look at the cycle of consciousness in reference to the galactic plane, we see that it is perfectly aligned to the changes that the Earth-Sun alignment go through in reference to the galactic plane. I understand this may be very deep, but it is so obvious when we look at it, and we will when we go into the sites. Now, because these sites change throughout cultures, we can't just store it in the stars and the sites. We now have to look at our stories and see how our stories reveal an unveiling over time and see how they match to this pattern. We see the transition from how the hero moves through and goes into learn ancient wisdom to become the healer, but how the hero got built is from the earlier hunter, undomesticated nature. And so when we look at the myths and we understand things like the hero's journey and how I will outline the healer's journey, we begin to see that consciousness within the human form has been scaffolded and managed by these stories, because these stories are what consciousness is able to use to begin to bring online and help manipulate and work with and mold the neurobiological pathways that we'll explore when we look at the so below aspect. Because all of these aspects, the consciousness cycle, the stars, the sites, the stories, these are the as above. These are the larger patterns that are unseen, that can't be seen, that we begin to map out and pass on. And then we can go the so below to see how these tell the story that unlocks the so below, which we can observe, we can measure, we can see, we can test, and that most of our sciences have done and help reveal this high science. Now, the pivotal in between, once we move from the stories, are the metaphysical sciences. So before we can get into our hard sciences, we got to look at the metaphysical sciences. These are the sciences that explore the ideas of meaning and symbology. These are the often unlanguaged and the more felt, unconscious, subconscious, archetypical understandings of ourselves. And these have been explored by everything from the shamans all the way through ancient mystics, alchemists, priests, and beyond. These are the spiritual aspects, the archetypical functions of humanity. And these storage devices are held in astrology, tarot, and then the earliest languages that we have in written and spoken form. Now, why this is important is because these are the outpourings of the meanings within our biology. These are what the archetypical functions of our neurobiology operate as and express as. And we can see that there are themes within humans that correlate and connect all of us to these basic 22 functions. And then we took those functions and mapped them on top of the physical sky. And that gives us the understanding of astronomy to astrology. So what we do is we can go astronomy, which is the physical observable storage device, then to astrology, which takes that physical storage device and applies meaning to it. So now we have a metaphysical science there. Then it brings it down into the tarot. The tarot holds that same information of these archetypical functions. And then we can go and make deep correlations to the earliest languages and the meanings of glyphs. The glyphs were the expressions of self in communication. So we would see that all of these are deeply connected. Those metaphorical devices have been mapped out, and that is what is called the cube. It becomes the key to all of this. It is the pivot point to connect the as above, so below, because the cube helps connect all of our ancient wisdom, these metaphorical storage devices, to these ancient sites and the initiation patterns that they would have done at these sites. How do I know this? Because the cube is a 360-degree model of what they would have been practicing at the sites. When you're told to build the cube, there are certain cardinal directions that you're told to imagine these metaphysical devices in. So you're told to imagine these tarot cards in certain areas of space, and that provides cardinal directions for you to see them in. The tarot card for the Empress would be at East Center, or the Devil card would be at West Down. And so you now get north, south, east, and west, up and down. And you begin to understand how these interact with the sites when you could lay it down perfectly in between these sites. So when you look at how the sites are oriented in the galactic sphere and the galactic plane, you can perfectly take the cube and lay it right down in the middle, and it fits one-to-one, not only with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, of the sites and the galaxy, but also the astronomy, because you can take the tarot and connect it to astrology, and all of the sites and the stars that are in the alignment at the placement on the summer solstice perfectly aligned to this cube. So it becomes the medium ground, the key that connects the as above to the so below, through the fact that the cube also can overlay the brain. So when we look at the cube and the tarot connections and the meanings of the tarot and the glyph, and we put our brain right in the middle of that cube, we see that the functions of the tarot cards, the meanings of these ancient glyphs, and the metaphysical storage of information that was trying to be passed down, what the meanings of those things are in the location that you're told to put them is actually what we've discovered that area of your brain function does. Now, what do I mean by that? We'll take what I've already said with the Devil card and explain it. The Devil card is said to be west down. Its ancient glyph is an eye. Its ancient word is ein. When you put that in west down and put a brain right in the middle of the cube, west down correlates, connects to the occipital lobe, which is what we've identified in neuroscience is the area of your brain where you see. Your eye function is the occipital lobe. This happens 22 areas, and I'll go into it more when we look at the cube. Through this glyph and these meanings, we can now go and begin to look at our neurobiology and begin to understand how the process and function of language begins to impact our neurobiology. And when we take things like sociology and philosophy and psychology and begin to understand how the impact of languages and the cognitive sciences impacts the neurosciences and the neurobiology, we begin to see how the stories actually shift and change the neurobiology. And what I mean by that is very simply, when you tell a story, it frames your neural connections. It creates pathways in your brain. When you tell a different story, it changes those pathways. When you've told a story for a very long time, it creates a very solid pathway and cues the biology to produce hormones and chemicals that are correlate to that pathway. So the story of "I love this person" cues that feeling of love within you. The idea of a evil demon or a villain within a Hollywood movie cues the neural pathways that are connected with that fear and that idea of a withdrawal, fear-based, scared response to something called a demon or a villain. And thereby you would retract and cortisol would be produced. Your sympathetic nervous system would be fired. So we can see how language impacts directly our neurobiology. And in that can begin to impact through our nervous system the genetic production and the proteins that go along with that. That is epigenetics. That is the so below idea. The fact that we can connect all of these over a very long period of time shows that humanity has been preparing a pathway or a model for itself and has been attempting to navigate through this unseen cycle of consciousness over this long period of time to begin to bring the biological evolution of the species online such that it can now move into the spiritual evolution of the species. And that's the ultimate purpose of this whole model, is to help us understand that while we can explain the biological evolution of the species, it is through the spiritual evolution of the species, the ideas that this high science reveals, that humanity will begin to unlock the memory and the ideas and the understandings necessary to progress forward. Because if it's just left up to the biological evolution, we will evolve into a much more fear-based reactive response. And we must transcend that, because if we don't, we won't be able to unify and work together to produce the understandings and the awareness and the coherence necessary to heal ourselves and this planet, have higher experiences, and operate when there are existential crises that can come and impact the conscious ability of humanity to be embodied into the physical species that is how we represent ourselves on this planet. Now, I understand that all of this is a lot, but I'm going to spend time unpacking this so that you can see it's very clearly mapped out. And I promise you, what I'm going to show you is profound and groundbreaking. You will not see this anywhere else, and no one has these pieces put together. I am only saying that to try to cue your interest and your curiosity. This is not something that I'm regurgitating information. This is deeply researched work. This has been run through years. I've been working with artificial intelligence for years to try to build this out in a clear and cohesive way, because what we're attempting to do is create brain coherence. And that brain coherence is what helps the species develop further through conscious evolution. And through conscious evolution, we heal ourselves and others. I'm going to spend the rest of the videos unpacking all of that. Make sure to subscribe, because this is groundbreaking and profound work that you won't find anywhere else. I promise you, you will be blown away.